The end of World War II in 1945 marked not just the fall of a regime but the reckoning of its key figures. Picture the chaos, the despair, and the dramatic shifts in power as the Allies closed in on Berlin, the heart of the Third Reich. The fate of Hitler's close associates varied wildly, a kaleidoscope of justice, evasion, and self-inflicted endings that tell a gripping story of a world in turmoil. Take Heinrich Himmler, for instance, the head of the SS, and one of the principal architects of the Holocaust. Himmler was captured by British forces in May 1945. You might think he would face justice for his horrendous crimes, but instead, he chose a coward's exit, swallowing cyanide before he could be brought to trial. His suicide speaks volumes about the fear and guilt that haunted these men. Did he think he could escape the consequences of his actions in death? Or was it a final act of defiance against a world that had turned against him? Then there's Joseph Goebbels, Hitler's Minister of Propaganda, who was not just a follower but a true believer in Nazi ideology. On May 1, 1945, in the depths of Hitler's bunker, he and his wife Magda made a horrific decision. They poisoned their 6 children before taking their own lives. It's chilling to think about the lengths they went to protect their twisted beliefs, even in the face of inevitable defeat. What kind of world do you have to live in to believe that death is a better option than surrender? Hermann Göring, the head of the Luftwaffe, had a different fate. Captured by the Allies, he stood trial at Nuremberg, where he was sentenced to death. But in a final act of defiance, he committed suicide with cyanide just hours before his execution. It's almost grotesque how these men clung to their lives only to choose death when facing justice. What does that say about their character? Did they truly believe they were above the law even in the end? Rudolf Hess, Hitler's deputy, took a bizarre path. In 1941, he flew solo to Scotland, attempting to negotiate peace with Britain, a move that was as futile as it was desperate. After the war, he was imprisoned and later tried at Nuremberg, where he was sentenced to life in prison. He spent decades in Spandau prison, ultimately dying in 1987, officially ruled a suicide. The irony is striking. A man who once held power and influence ended his days in a cell, a stark reminder of how quickly fortunes can change. Then there's Albert Speer, Hitler's chief architect and minister of armaments. Unlike many of his associates, Speer admitted guilt during his Nuremberg trial. He received a 20-year sentence, and upon his release in 1966, he spent the rest of his life reflecting on his role in the Nazi regime. His memoirs offer a glimpse into the mind of a man who built grand structures for a regime that sought to obliterate millions. Was he remorseful, or was he simply trying to reshape his legacy? Karl Donitz, who briefly succeeded Hitler as head of state, had a less dramatic fate. He surrendered to the Allies and was sentenced to 10 years in prison at Nuremberg. Released in 1956, he lived until 1980. His story is a reminder that not all of Hitler's associates faced the same grim fate, but his legacy is forever tainted by the shadow of the regime he served. Now let's talk about Martin Bormann, Hitler's private secretary. His fate remained a mystery for years after the war. He disappeared in the chaos of Berlin's fall, and it wasn't until 1972 that his remains were discovered. It's believed he died by suicide or was killed during those tumultuous final days. The uncertainty surrounding his end reflects the chaos of the time, a fitting end for a man who lived in the shadows of power. Adolf Eichmann, the major organizer of the Holocaust, took a different route. After the war, he escaped to Argentina, living under a false identity. But justice caught up with him in 1960 when Israeli agents captured him. His trial in Israel was a landmark moment, and the world watched as he was found guilty and executed in 1962. His story serves as a reminder that no matter how far one runs, the truth has a way of surfacing. Reinhard Heydrich, one of the most feared Nazi officials, was assassinated by Czech resistance fighters in 1942. His death, well before the war ended, shows the resistance and the fight against tyranny that continued even in the darkest of times. Hans Frank, the Governor-General of Nazi-occupied Poland, was captured, tried, and hanged in 1946. His trial was a stark reminder of the atrocities committed under his governance, and his execution served as a symbol of accountability for those who perpetrated such horrors. Wilhelm Keitel and Ernst Kaltenbrunner, both high-ranking officials, faced similar fates at Nuremberg, found guilty of war crimes and executed in 1946. Their deaths marked a significant moment in history, establishing a precedent for international law regarding crimes against humanity. The Nuremberg trials were monumental, not just for the individuals tried but for the message they sent that those in power are not above the law. Many lower-ranking Nazis were also tried and convicted while others fled, living under false identities, only to be discovered years later. The trials were a crucial step in the global pursuit of justice, a reminder that accountability must prevail, even when the stakes are high. As we reflect on these fates, we must remember the lessons of history. The stories of these men are not just tales of downfall, they are cautionary reminders of the dangers of unchecked power and the importance of justice in the face of atrocity. The echoes of their choices resonate through time, urging us to remain vigilant against tyranny in any form. Like, share, and subscribe to keep these lessons alive.